Warning: this story is extremely scary and intense, not recommended for weak-hearted viewers or for watching alone at night. Once it starts, it may stay with you. Watch at your own risk.
Daniel never believed in haunted houses. To him, the Miller property on the outskirts of that forgotten West Virginia town was nothing more than a structural carcass, a victim of rot and bad luck. The locals avoided the place with a quiet, frantic urgency, their warnings wrapped in uneasy glances rather than words. But Daniel dismissed it as small-town superstition. When he stepped over the splintered wooden threshold just before midnight, the forest behind him felt deathly silent. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was as if nature itself had held its breath, refusing to witness what was about to happen. The house stood like a skeletal titan, its windows black and hollow like empty eye sockets, watching him with an ancient predatory hunger. The air inside was impossibly thick, stale, cold, and heavy, as if it had been breathed too many times by something that refused to leave. As he clicked on his flashlight, the beam seemed to struggle against the darkness, barely cutting through a fog that began to seep from the floorboards. It started with small, rhythmic distortions. Faint, heavy footsteps echoed from the floor above, a mechanical thud, drag, thud, even though the second story had collapsed into the cellar decades ago. Whispers curled through the hallways like smoke, snaking around his ears and calling his name, only to vanish the moment he turned his head. He tried to tell himself it was the wind, but the air was dead still. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the logic of the world fractured. The digital display on the battery-powered clock he had brought flickered violently before the numbers froze and bled into darkness. In that sudden, crushing vacuum of silence, a new sound emerged from deep within the walls, a slow, wet, dragging sound, like something heavy and bloated being pulled across jagged wood. Then the voice came again, but this time it wasn't a whisper. It was a distorted chorus, vibrating through the floorboards, pulsing within the peeling wallpaper, and hissing from the shadows directly against the nape of his neck. When he spun around to flee, the exit he had entered through was gone. In its place was a hallway that hadn't existed moments ago, an impossible narrow corridor that stretched into an infinite flickering void. As he stumbled forward, the doors along the passage began to creak open in a synchronized slow-motion wave. Behind each frame stood twisted figures, their limbs bent at unnatural, bone-breaking angles. Their faces were pressed too close to the cracks, their unblinking eyes wide with a terrifying silent recognition that made Daniel's blood turn to ice. At the far end of the corridor, she appeared. She wore a torn white dress that fluttered in a phantom wind. Her head was tilted at a sharp, sickening angle, and a curtain of matted black hair covered her face, save for a single, glowing hollow eye that pinned him to the spot. She didn't walk, she moved in jarring, nauseating jerks, like frames of a corrupted video skipping forward. One moment she was 50 feet away, the next she was 20, then 10, closing the distance instantly without ever crossing the physical space between them. When she finally reached him, the smell was overwhelming, the scent of wet earth, copper, and ancient decay. She leaned into his ear, her breath of freezing mist against his skin, and hissed, "You shouldn't have come back, Daniel. We've kept your seed warm." In that moment, the mental dam he had built years ago burst. A flood of suppressed, jagged memories crashed over him, images of a childhood he had systematically erased from his mind. He saw himself as a terrified 7-year-old standing in this very hallway, clutching a box of matches. He heard the laughter of his siblings curdling into high-pitched screams, and felt the blistering heat of a fire that had never made the evening news because the house had swallowed the evidence whole. He realized with a sickening jolt that he wasn't a stranger or a victim here. He was the survivor who had escaped by leaving his family behind to burn in the dark. The house wasn't haunting him, it was reclaiming its architect. As the walls began to breathe in a rhythmic, terrifying unison, and the floorboards tightened around his feet like wooden teeth, Daniel realized the true horror. The Miller property hadn't been empty for 30 years. It had been holding his place, growing stronger on the echoes of the screams he had caused. Suddenly, the floor beneath him didn't just creak, it dissolved. Daniel plummeted through a fluid of ash and embers, landing in a perfect recreation of the parlor as it looked in 1996. The fire was roaring all around him, but it didn't burn his skin, it burned his mind. He saw his younger self standing by the door, the silver handle glowing red-hot. Across the room, the woman in the white dress, his mother, was reaching for him, her skin bubbling like wax, her voice a guttural plea for help that he had ignored 3 decades ago.
"The dead is unpaid," the walls whispered in 1,000 voices. The figures from the corridor began to step into the burning room. They weren't monsters. They were his siblings, their small charred hands reaching out to hold him. Daniel tried to scream, but his lungs were filled with the soot of his own history. He realized then that the outside world he had lived in for 30 years was the hallucination, and this eternal burning moment was his only reality. The house didn't just want him back, it wanted him to stay in the fire forever. Outside, in the present day, the forest remained silent. A single flashlight lay on the porch, its beam fading into a dull orange glow before flickering out, leaving no trace that Daniel had ever returned.